Hello, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I can see we've still got some participants joining us, but I'm going to get cracking. My name's Shelagh Young, and I'm engagement lead for the David Hume Institute. And I'm standing in for Susan Murray, who's had to send her apologies at the last minute to chair this session. For those of you joining us for the first time, we're an independent charity established in 1985 to increase diversity of thought. And our focus is on issues related to the economy and public policy. A link to our website is going to be in the Zoom chat, so you can see that, you can have a look and find out more about us. And please do also use the chat to make connections with other people who are in on this seminar. Just before we get started and I introduce our speakers and our panelists for today, just to let you know a few things. We are recording this session and it'll all be uploaded to our website, so you can catch up on it afterwards as well. As I welcome everybody, please just use that chat, as I said, to introduce yourselves. There will be about 15 minutes of panel conversation and presentation today before we move to questions from the audience. For the questions, please post them in the Q&A. You can see if you're not familiar with the webinar format, you can see there's a Q&A button at the bottom and you can post your questions there. We'll then invite you to unmute so you can ask your question directly. So post them at any time during the discussions and we'll keep an eye and we'll bring you in if we've got time to do so. When asking your question, it would be great if you could say who you are and if you're from an organisation, your organisation, so people are finding out more about you, not just hearing your question. And if you have any problems whatsoever technically, for example, with being able to unmute, please just let us know. You can use the chat for that. So without any more introductions, I want to welcome our speakers for today in our series International Insights, and today it's about intergenerational care. Joining me today is Jacqueline Cassidy. She's Director for Practice for the Fostering Network, which is the UK's leading fostering charity, and she's Director for Fostering Network in Scotland. Before this, she was Director for Scotland and Wales for the charity Place to Be. And in 2019, she received a Churchill Fellowship and conducted the research you'll hear about today on intergenerational co-located care. And the focus was learning from the US, from Singapore and Japan. The interest here is that it's about an assets-based approach that could tackle some of the challenges associated with poverty and improving health and well-being outcomes in lots of places, but obviously we're interested in how that could work in Scotland. We also have Karen Hedge with us. Karen is Deputy Chief Executive Officer for Scottish Care. Scottish Care represents the largest group of independent sector social care providers in Scotland. So in this role, she gets involved in shaping the future of social care, which we know is an incredibly important area, exploring areas such as new models of care and support, technology, commissioning and integration. She has significant board level experience and a career that covers the statutory, charitable and the independent sector. And we also welcome Jane Brumpton. Jane is Chief Executive of Early Years Scotland, which is our leading national third sector organisation for children from pre-birth to around about the age of 5. And she's committed to providing the very best start in life for every child in Scotland. She has years of experience as a nursery and primary teacher, most recently as Deputy Head Teacher of St Philomena's Primary, an enhanced nurture unit in Glasgow, where she was involved in citywide developments around nurture in primary and early years. So I'm going to move over now to ask Jacqueline to give us some insights into her work. Jacqueline.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Let me just share my screen. I've got a few slides, just so you don't have to look at me the whole time. So let me just, from the start. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So I just wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Jacqueline Cassidy, as Sheila said. I currently work at the Fostering Network, but in 2019 I was based at Children in Scotland, and I had the opportunity to undertake a Churchill Fellowship visiting Singapore, Japan and the US to look at co-located intergenerational care. And in particular, I was interested in how those settings and that intergenerational practice can improve outcomes for children and adults, particularly looking at how it can improve outcomes for our children and young people living in communities of disadvantage. So for those of you who have done work in those types of communities, you'll know that for children and young people's outcomes to be improved, they need positive relationships. One good relationship can be very transformational for a child. So providing them with opportunities to build those relationships is hugely important. And in those same communities, we have adults who are experiencing loneliness and a lack of purpose. And we know that by looking at supporting them to feel purposeful and to have some use for their time and to not feel isolated, we can improve outcomes for adults. So I think by looking at a shared approach for children and young people and adults and older adults together, we can actually overcome some of the challenges that both communities are experiencing. So for me, it was all about kind of building relationships to change outcomes. These lovely photos here are from a fabulous setting in Japan that has been going now for about sort of 40, 50 years. You won't believe it, but the temperature outside this particular morning was about 4 degrees, but they go outside every day to do this exercise practice. Now, interestingly, the exercise is also what those older Japanese people would have had when they were younger. So they do this exercise in front of the older people, and then they go over, and as you can see, they sort of share cuddles, they chat to each other, and it's a very warm relationship they've built. This particular place in Japan, it's absolutely integrated. It's not just a kind of 15 minutes here and there or an opportunity to sing some Christmas carols for the choir. This is a all day, every day. And I'll be sharing an image with you later. That the physical space that they share is absolutely open, and older people can move across from the care facility into the nursery, and the nursery children can move across from the care facility into the older people's space. And that opportunity to kind of be together for extended periods of time is really helpful, I think, in deepening those relationships and forming bonds between them. So this is the shared space that they have. Maybe if you can squint a little, you'll see on the left-hand side, that's the physio space for the older people. The second image is actually of the nursery space, and hopefully images 3 and 4 give you a sense that actually what's in between those is the space that's shared by all of them. The kids have their nap there during the day, but it's also a place where they do theatre, and it is where they do the Christmas carols, but it's also an entirely shared space that gives them the opportunity to kind of interact every day in the way that they find that they want to interact. When I kind of, both in Japan and Singapore and the US, I think there were very different approaches to risk taking. And I know that obviously we've got quite different approaches to risk taking. It's something I've said to colleagues in the past, is we've allowed ourselves to put some risk back into early years. We've got some risk in our primary and secondary provision, but we don't really allow older people to take the risks that they might want to take. What you see here is a bunch of women who live in this is a live-in facility. Most of them are over the age of 90, and they're preparing lunch. And you'll see an image of the young girl. Her mother is one of the carers in this setting. She is allowed to wander in and out under their feet. She is around all the time, interacting with them and playing with them whilst they are cooking and preparing food. One of the places that I also visited, they took the same approach to this, of allowing these older people, many of whom have quite severe dementia, to actually be involved in cooking, but also cooking with young people. So there was an after-school club where young people were in a daycare centre after school, and the older ladies, well, first of all, they were helping them with their homework, which was fantastic, and achieved really amazing outcomes. They acted in that kind of granny role of kind of both praising and nagging at the same time, and encouraging children and young people to do their homework. But they also taught them around cooking. So, in Japan, I think we think they've got a really healthy diet, but actually it's very salty. And because of time poverty, a lot of young people are living off noodles. They're being picked up from daycare at kind of 7 o'clock in the evening, go home, make some noodles, and go to bed. They're not really getting a kind of high vitamin vegetable-based diet. So the older ladies were teaching them how to cook, and it's been fantastic because they're eating better and they're learning from these older people who have dementia. So again, improved wellbeing outcomes kind of all around, really. So I think if we looked at kind of how we put some risk back into what we do in practice, both in childcare and in elder care, that we've got opportunities to see some really rich assets exchange. I've already sort of lightly touched on this, but I think at the moment our intergenerational practice, we've got some fabulous intergenerational practice in Scotland, and I know my colleagues will comment on that and share on that. Just an observation that lots of places say they're doing intergenerational care, but it's about the depth of that relationship, really, in terms of kind of, if we really want to improve outcomes, the deeper the relationship, the more improved the outcome. So here just some lovely examples. This was in the US about kind of passive versus active. So there's that second picture is sort of older people can kind of look out the windows and watch young people playing, but in kind of, you know, images 1 and 2, you can see that older people are actually playing alongside, joining in games, and they're supporting each other in that practice. These are obviously images of kind of younger children, but actually saw really brilliant examples with older young people as well, particularly a fabulous project in the US working with sort of teenagers, some of whom have sort of their own communication challenges, but by supporting them to have conversations with older people, they are developing their own communication skills, as well as giving an opportunity for older people to have someone to talk to. The fourth slide, I think, hopefully, yes, there you go. So the fourth slide that was on the other page is on here as well. It's about playing together. In Singapore, there was a playground where you could get a wheelchair on, you could get an older person on, you could do a seesaw ride with grandma, you can go on the roundabout with your friends who are in a wheelchair. It's absolutely about accessible play. And there's a lovely rocking chair there that, again, it's a facility in the US where you can get your wheelchair onto there and you can sit alongside your grandchildren and have a wee swing. Down there on the left-hand side, well, left-hand side of my side, I'm not sure about you. Left-hand side of my side is from Japan, where that top deck is often inhabited by teenagers who've just come from school, playing music, drinking coffee, and that is, in order to access that space, they go through the daycare centre for older adults who have care needs, who live at home, but that's a daycare centre there for them. And it's just creating these spaces where they can be together, where they interact, where older adults and children and young people are in a community with each other. Right, just moving swiftly on. One of the big issues that really came clearly across in Japan was the benefit of being able to have the staff have their children in the same space as them. So on the left-hand side, you see the young woman who's crouched down there, that's her baby. She's also a care worker in that facility. And as you can see on the right-hand side, that is a baby that is very, very well loved and well cared for. But that's also an incredibly happy staff member who doesn't dash off at 6 o'clock because she's got to go and pick up her children. Her children are in the setting with her. They're well cared for, they're looked after, and she can give her attention to the older people whose needs she needs to meet. So in Japan, they're much further down the line than this. In the US, lots of the facilities that I visited were actually in care homes where the care workers were based and who could place their children into these intergenerational care settings. So there was some of this in the US, but it wasn't as integrated as we saw in Japan. And I hope that the very happy faces tell you at least something about the outcomes. But when I think about this through the lens of disadvantage, I just think of that, how much love is being poured into that child, and what opportunities there might be for other children who perhaps don't get to experience that for a number of reasons. But actually, what could we be doing if we provided these opportunities for our older people to contribute in the way that they know how, regardless of what their own current circumstances are. So now I'm going to whiz through these next slides because Sheila's going to tell me I've got to be quiet. I've got to hurry up. This is a planning one, and I can share them later. This is about training. I think we need to be training together. I think we need to bring our staff together. This is about facilitation. I think it's incredibly important that we have facilitation. These things do not just happen by themselves. We need to bring people together. Evaluation is hugely important. At the moment, evaluation isn't particularly well done in intergenerational practice, and it's often focused on the outcomes of adults, not on the outcomes of children. And I really think we need to look at that. This, in terms of kind of the conversation today, is probably the most important slide. You'll be happy to know it's my last, Sheila. Which is about kind of our policy environment. What do we need really in terms of an approach from Scottish Government and colleagues in local authorities and in regulatory bodies? For me, it's about shared approaches starting at government level, shared approaches starting in care regulation, and joining up resources. I put desegregation of resources there, which sounds a bit negative, but actually it's about joining up resources, about bringing them together, about thinking about our populations who need care in a coherent way. And I would also really urge support from policymakers to grow our evidence base, support change programs, and really evidence how bringing our communities of children and young people and older adults together, we can actually make benefits for both of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm going to ask Karen for her very swift and sort of short response to that, just to give us some of your insights.
Thank you very much. And Jacqueline, what a fantastic opportunity to go and do that research.
Amazing.
Oh, it's fab. So, and I've really loved hearing the different stories and the depths of that. And I think what it's made me question is really, what is older people's care and support in Scotland? And within that, is it what we think it is? I would counter that many times it's not. Certainly our media and oftentimes our politicians seem to think it's really all about tea. It is far more complex and far more complicated. And that shift of mindset towards that asset-based approach and positive risk-taking is one which has been happening for many years actually in adult social care, but hasn't quite made it to mainstream thinking or mainstream acceptance. We do have a huge opportunity ahead of us with the National Care Service coming into being. And actually, I'm just going to throw a spanner in the works, but while you were talking, it made me think that I could quickly share this screen. So hopefully you can see that. And this is a piece of work we did called our Collective Care Futures. And literally everyone and their granny contributed to this piece of work. And some of the themes which came out of this was our thinking around about what should a national care service be and what should it conceptualize. So that putting the foot down is that this thinking has been around for such a long time. Why on earth are we not just getting on with it and doing it? That social care mindset is, how do we grasp that? You know, social care is unique, but it's not often what people think it is. So how do we get that thinking in and have ownership of this care space in an integrated way? Instilling that life course approach from cradle to grave. So that's that thinking in the long-term approach. Get rid of the transitions thinking, get rid of that, let's create a Birdsong village in the middle of nowhere so that we start to interact with individuals in our own shared spaces. The choice of yours is very much about harnessing the Self-Directed Support Act and making it real and making it live. Expertise of all sectors and perspectives. Can you imagine the richness if you have dual registered workforce who are working in one space in different spaces, and the learning and experience they can bring? But to do that, we need to be recognizing them as the professionals that they are, and that involves terms and conditions and payment in the same way, in the same space as well. And those pathways of learning through the mutual experience. So again, we need to be thinking outside of that traditional care box. It's not just about care at home. It's not just about care homes. It's actually about that life course. And how do we create a career pathway that encourages people to come into social care? You know, I started in care many years ago as a paid care worker, and that career pathway wasn't there in front of me. So how do we create that in that intergenerational space and make it valuable and a professional skill set that people enjoy and want to contribute to? Regulation is a key theme that came up through this report. So how are we creating an empowering regulatory practice that values his people, allows that positive risk-taking to happen? And lastly, reclaiming and renewing, not reinventing. We've spoken about this. It is just family life in our own homes. How do we make that work in an environment where people live, just happens that they're maybe younger or maybe older, and how do we make that normal again? I'm going to stop there because that's me out of time, but thank you.
Karen, thank you so much. I mean, I think that last question about how do we make this work, this kind of environment that we all know about because it's called home, how do we make it work in these ways is brilliant. We couldn't see your shared screen, and I've just asked a question of my colleague supporters to see if that can be made to happen at some point. But I'll just introduce Jane now and ask for her reflection.
I'll put the link into the chat for folks.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you. Jane.
Thanks, Sheila. Thanks, everyone. And Jacqueline, I mean, how fantastic were those images? You just get really drawn in by them. And Karen, I agree with so much of what you've said as well, and the detail in the report, Jacqueline. So in Early Years Scotland, we're always keen to support research and development that really puts children at the heart of services. And my goodness, have we heard that today from you? And Jacqueline's report, I would say, is something that we really want to explore and learn more about. And as Karen said, and as Jacqueline, you mentioned earlier, many people will be aware that things like this does happen in early years. Early learning and childcare settings have experience of projects like this or visits. And, you know, there is that encouragement to visit care homes for our youngest learners, and we know how beneficial it can be for both the children and the adults. But as you rightly said, Jacqueline, this report seeks to explore how we can take that a stage further and really support more formal implementation of this in terms of intergenerational care, and how do we build those deep and meaningful caring relationships, as you both mentioned, with children and young people. So we really do welcome this discussion today. And I think Jacqueline touched on this as well, and the importance of attachment figures. And we know how positive attachment figures, how beneficial they are for young children's lives and how they can be transformational in your earliest years. So if this was put in as a more formal approach, then that can only be a good thing. So I just welcome the discussion today, hearing more about what are the perceived barriers to this. And Karen, you've mentioned quite a few of them there as well. Jacqueline's mentioned them in your recommendations, and how we can learn from practice from other countries. I know that we can never lift a model in another country and expect it to work here, but so many good examples provided in there. And the fact that you're talking specifically, Jacqueline, about children affected by poverty and disadvantage, then it's even more important that we explore this at this time and help to try and address these pervasive challenges and move away from that often deficit model, as you say, that can be perceived with regards to older adults. So really just, welcome the discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I just wondered if any of you wanted to respond to one another and what you've heard. I was really interested in your point, Jacqueline, about evaluation, because obviously one can't evaluate anything without making something happen. And we've got this grand old tradition of initiative-itis in Scotland, where we do something small and light touch that doesn't last very long, maybe don't learn as much as we need to learn from it. How would you like to see something unfold? I mean, Karen's mentioned the National Care Service, but that feels like a sort of Leviathan project, and this feels like something that we need to be kind of coaxing into being alongside that. How would you like to see it unfold so we had something we could actually evaluate?
I would be keen to see the sort of test of change approach that's been taken by people like kind of the Early Years Collaborative and the Children and Young People's Collaborative, which seems to be quite successful in looking at a number of projects, looking at tests of change across the piece, and then kind of adding that together and having a much greater totality. You know, obviously I would like everything to change everywhere tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. So I think an approach that that avoids both the initiative-itis and that's so small that nobody notices or it happens in a vacuum, to something that's a little bit more like, a number of projects that can be running alongside each other, that acts of tests of change that then can be upscaled and look at the sustainability. I think that there are a number of things, like Karen said, that need to change in the regulatory environment, or at least need to be put in front of people in terms of the regulatory environment, because I think Karen would probably argue that most of it already exists, but it's about people knowing about it and having the confidence to act within those boundaries. So I think there's a couple of things there.
Oh, Sheila, I think you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Sorry, I thought I'd clicked on that. I was interested, Karen, because obviously you represent a care sector that has these independent providers, and there is a parallel therefore with childcare. So it's not true to say you can only do it if it's public sector, you can only do it if it's third sector. So I'm interested in how you might see it unfolding as something that we could really start to test and trial.
So that is a really interesting question, and certainly when Jacqueline and I first spoke, it's something we briefly touched upon, and there's a distinction between the formalising of this and what happens naturally. So in Scotland, and actually just for those of you who are on this webinar today, the independent sector comprises of private, voluntary and charitable and employee-owned organisations as well. So basically any organisation that's not statutory. Around about 70% of care homes and about 55% of care at home hours are currently delivered by independent sector in Scotland. And in Scotland, the majority of them are actually small family-run organisations, which is quite distinct from the rest of the UK. And what we found is that actually in those family-run organisations, people will have, their kids will come in at the end of the school day, and that's quite normal because it is their family. Now, where it becomes more complex is actually, is that extension of, for the people who are residents in a care home, for instance, where does their family begin and end? Who do they want coming in and going out? So that's some of the things that we need to plough through. But there are, certainly some family-orientated intergenerational experiences that happen. Clearly, much of this has been put on hold because of the pandemic, and there are a whole host of other challenges that has brought about. But there is that what has happened naturally and normally just as an extension of individuals' lives, and what needs to happen maybe to formalise some of the arrangements that sit around about this and to extend it and embed it. Do you mind if I also come in on the pilotitis bit? So I'm currently working with Improving Adult Care Together. It's a programme called Impact, and we're funded by UKRI. And working with Stirling University, Birmingham University, and many others, really to get out of this pilotitis stuff. So it's looking at evidence implementation and unpicking what are the key factors in that. So I thought that might be an interesting piece of work for people to know about as well. So this is our second year of that. Last year was the fact-finding mission, and this year will be very much trialing different approaches to embedding evidence so that we can start to unpick what are the key factors and make change happen.
So that's really interesting, and I wondered if you've got a moment, if you could maybe stick a link to that in the chat so people can take it straight away. That would be great. Jane, did you have any thoughts based on kind of what you've just heard about why the pilots or evaluation? I'm also really interested because obviously we've got what parents might think of children being involved, because we're a very divided society. Unless you do have grandparents or elderly people in your lives, I think, old age is like a foreign country to a lot of people. Do you think that might be a hurdle, attitudes?
I do, absolutely, Sheila. And I was thinking that as we were speaking, that's what sort of jumped into my head. I think we could do a lot of quite transformational work and test of change, but we do really need to bring the families with us. And I know that there's, in ELC in general, even simple things like outdoor play, access to outdoor play, there's mixed emotions about that. There's parents that are on board with get them out all day and others that are maybe slightly reticent. So I think we would need to look at that and really engage parents and carers to make sure that they fully understand this model as well. So I would definitely agree with that. And I was also thinking about the fact that in ELC, Early Learning and Childcare National, at the moment, we're looking at ways to bring more people into the sector, encourage people in. We're looking at ways of retaining them within the sector, because it's a sector that's very much affected by that at the moment. And post-pandemic, we're trying to think of different ways of encouraging people to come in. So this could be a hook. It's something a bit different, but as you say, we would need to think about the professional learning support there. So we talked about that joint attitude to professional learning and how there's an opportunity here. So we've been talking about the fact that for early learning and childcare workers, we can't just presume that they are comfortable working in that more family focused way that we do in early years. And we've had a few years of not having the parents in because of all the restrictions. and all the sort of negative connotations associated with that. So as we start to open up again as a sector, we're finding that the ELC sector is also needing some support with that, and we can't presume that they have that skill set. So there's an opportunity here to widen that and make it not, because we all work in silos with professional learning, don't we, rather than thinking, how could we do this in a more joint way? So yes, I think there's a lot to take on board. I think there's a lot of great ideas in terms of tests of change, and really to get it out there beyond just it works well in small pockets across the country, even though there is good evidence of that in early years as well.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we've got some questions coming in now from the other participants online. I haven't seen any coming in yet, but do post your questions in the Q&A function. You can see that at the bottom of the screen, and then we'll take them as they come along. I think that last point you made, Jane, links into almost what Karen was saying about a lot of small scale family providers. And I think one of the things that's often very hard to do is to get new ideas across a sector that's got a lot of small players in it. We can be quite good at getting one big institution to trial something or take it on board, maybe not so good when we're talking really about SME, so small level organizational changes. But it seems like that's a really fertile territory. And Jacqueline, in reading your report, it seemed to me that it was mostly quite large scale sort of places that had decided to really invest in this rather than a network of small providers. Would that be a correct view, or is it just because that's what you had a chance to look at?
I think there's different, it was different in different places. Can I just say, firstly, I just want to draw your attention to what Alison's posted in the chat, because actually, so if anybody's an expert in all of this, it's Alison at Generations working together, and she's just highlighted kind of the training piece that they've already got amazing training, but they're also working at kind of intergenerational pathways. So definitely something to pick up on there. It was particularly in Singapore where there was a really national approach to intergenerational practice. So they have produced a 10-year plan around their aging population, and they have, I mean, obviously a much smaller geography than us, but about a similar number of people and a similar kind of aging population, and also lots of the challenges that we experience in terms of our aging population. In terms of kind of that pyramid of aging is actually inverted, the triangle is inverted, so we're going to have a lot less young people supporting a lot more older people, super aging as well. And so they've been looking at this strategy, and intergenerational co-located care is a big part of the strategy for them. But it's not the only part of that strategy. And they're looking at, so they've planned 10 co-located sites, which are happening. I visited one, there's a couple others coming on stream. They are at scale. They also have an at-scale service in terms of kind of nursery provision through the national NTUC, the National Trade Union Congress, who provide services through their kind of early years settings as well. So that again is happening at scale. And then they have some others, kind of older age group, a silver surfer kind of opportunity for sharing skills between older people and younger people. But it is part of a large scale strategy in order to kind of meet the needs of that massive population change that they're experiencing. So I think for us not to take a holistic view of all of this, I think is a little bit naive, because we know what's coming down the line. So we need to really be looking at kind of what are the other ways that we could be doing this. And, you know, if Scotland isn't the place to do creative change, then I don't know where it is. You know, we've embraced some really interesting, radical, different ideas. Even, you know, the extension of early years and childcare is a radical solution to some of the stuff that we've been facing. So this is just an extension of that. If we can have forest schools in Inverness, I think we can have shared care in Glasgow, you know, at a scale.
Definitely, Jacqueline. Well, we've got a couple of questions coming in. So Lorraine George has a question. So Tom, I wonder if you can unmute Lorraine, and Lorraine, unmute yourself, and you can ask that question yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, hurrah. It's nice when the tech works. Yeah, so I work for Generations Working Together and have met with, or started to meet with, the Care Inspectorate around how can we support the development of intergenerational co-location. And in England, even though we work with 2 regulatory bodies, so we have Ofsted and CQC, we've enabled, by virtue of the fact that childminders can work 50% of their week from non-domestic premises, we've already started to explore embedding childminders and letting them work from care homes in Torbay, which has been a much easier process for the care home to sort of get their head around, to support. It's been much easier from an insurance, from a risk assessment point of view. And you know, and this was work done with two regulators and bringing them together across the table to have discussions. And I'm just wondering how much easier would it be with the Care Inspectorate being the same regulator for both bodies?
You're on mute, Sheila.
Yes, I am. That's very bad. I was busy looking at other questions. Yes, sorry. I was asking if anyone wanted to respond to that directly, because it's just an interesting point.
It is. It is. I was going to say I'm happy to come in. Obviously, in our organisation, we work closely with the Care Inspectorate, and it's a really, really interesting model that I've not heard about. And I think it's something, as you say, the fact that we've got the Care Inspectorate that inspects childminders and ELC settings, I think there's an opportunity there. So it's definitely something that we could raise the discussion with Care Inspectorate colleagues and see how that could be replicated. And it's always good when it's happened elsewhere and you can reflect on that evidence base. So yes, I think it's definitely worth a discussion. I'm not aware about the 50% of their time out with their home, but I can look into that. But it's definitely worth a discussion with the Care Inspectorate, and I think they would be really open to that. And they've very much over the years been talking about how to make children more risk aware in settings and not have that cotton wool culture. So I think there's an opportunity there to explore that.
That's really interesting. Got another question which is about ethnic minorities from Shivana Hussain Ahmed. Do you want to unmute yourself, and Tom will unmute you and ask the question yourself, Shivana?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, wow. Do you know, I had no idea this facility was available. I thought we all had to be shushed up when we were on the webinars. But anyway, I guess I'm just going to read the question because, I mean, I guess it's... I'm just thinking out loud here, really, because, I've been to a few sort of, well, we've been having some of these conversations, and I always imagine what would this look like for my parents, or what would this look like for my children? And to be perfectly honest, I think the majority of the time I just can't see it, because I think there's often an assumption, made when we're talking about looking at new practice and new ways of doing things. We always think about it in terms of what would it look like for the majority, and not necessarily thinking about, well, what about those who don't necessarily fit that mold? What about them? Or I think sometimes it's easy to sort of just ignore, perhaps, because nobody's talking about them. So I guess my question was based around some of that thinking. So it was about, we already know, I guess, that intergenerational care can look different for in various different communities across Scotland, and I guess for me, it was specifically around certain ethnic minority communities. Is there, I guess the question I would have for the panel is, are you aware of projects or examples or evidence around what that even looks like? And if not, is there a gap there perhaps that we should be trying to address in terms of trying to know perhaps or learn something about what intergenerational care does look like at the moment, or what it could like, or what those families even want, I guess. And then it's then thinking about, we are thinking more widely about sort of models of care or approaches. How will those meet the needs of those who have cultural or language differences? Because at the moment, we know for sure that there's a lot of older people from some ethnic minority communities who are not getting the care and support that they should be, because it just doesn't exist, you know. And I guess the sort of end point of that is, you know, if there are no services and support, who is providing that care and support? And often it's other family members, I guess, which kind of goes back to you know the point that I would normally make, because I work for a national carer organisation which supports unpaid carers, because ultimately we find that there are a disproportionate number of women from ethnic minority communities who are providing care for older members of their families at home, because there's nothing at the moment. So I guess I'll stop there, but yeah, so quite a few questions in there, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, and I think one of the bigger questions there is about something that Jacqueline's report certainly does touch on, which is there's care in home type settings and there's care at home. And I know, Jacqueline, you mentioned day facilities where there was that interaction. That doesn't of course deal with the fact that there are carers who are doing too much care on a familial level without the support that they probably deserve and need, which is part of your point, Shelagh, I think. But people want to respond, Shelagh. Yes, Karen.
Hi. What Siobhan's highlighted there is sort of a long-standing lack of understanding, really. And as you say, Siobhan, we don't have the workforce at this point in time who perhaps are able to meet the needs of that particular diaspora within Scotland. We did some work it was before pandemic, so before that my brain is slightly frazzled as to the timeline, with Roshini Sharma from, I think it's Housing Scotland at the time, and she spoke, I'll find it and I'll put the link in again the next time someone comes in. She spoke really passionately actually about this issue, which is actually what the white Scottish definition of care is often quite different from people from ethnic minority communities, and what's the interface between the two, and actually that it can be really hard, because people from ethnic minority communities are often then sometimes living that Western lifestyle, certainly within the younger generations, which then that creates that split and that challenge. Jacqueline actually brought this up in her report as well, when you're seeing the increase in working families where both parents are working, and therefore the requirement for care to come in, and how do we ensure that we have a suitable workforce that are cognizant of the needs of that sector, and able to work around what is sometimes a different timetable or a different agenda as well. And it really is a huge issue. So while somebody else comes in on that, I'll find the report that comes in that, and I think what you've done is really raise the need to readdress this issue, because so many things we were working on pre-pandemic got put on hold, clearly, as infection prevention control and well-being became at the forefront of our minds, but so many other things have been left behind and left this really real gap, which has exacerbated things like isolation, loneliness, poverty, and these things have come bubbling up and really need to be addressed very soon.
Before anyone else comes in on this, I'm just saying we invited Alison Clyde if she would like to make a contribution in this part of the session rather than just ask a question. And I believe Tom's trying to fix that up for us. So if you see Alison pop up, that's what it's about. Jane or Jacqueline, did you have anything you wanted to say in response to Shelagh?
Hi, no, happy to come in, and I think you're right, Shelagh, there's a lot of learning there, and how can we take that forward? And it made me think about, in terms of your question around what's happening or any models, it's not quite exactly the same, but I touched on it initially when we heard about Jacqueline's report, is that we have what's called a Stay, Play and Learn programme in Early Years Scotland. So it's not regulated, it's very much an approach that encourages parents, carers or grandparents, and it tends to be a lot of grandparents. They come along to community settings that we've set up, and it does what it says in the tin, stay, play and learn, but we're not subject to care inspectorate guidance in that way, because it's, our early years qualified staff run the sessions, but the benefits that we've had of often grandparents doing the childcare during the day, bringing them along to these sessions and then all joining together. And, you know, everyone's learning from each other and the earlier staff are there giving ideas and pointers. And there's some real inspirational practice there, the discussions, the debates that we have, the support mechanisms. We can signpost in lots of different ways. So there are small pockets of things that are happening, and that's something that we're speaking to the government about making more formal, so that part of a child's childcare week could be in sessions like this. So just another thought and another idea of some sort of types of models that we do.
Jacqueline, did you want to contribute?
Just one small thing. It just gives me an opportunity to kind of plug one of the main things in my report, which is about communities at a disadvantage and looking at what we can do to support those communities, because intergenerational practice, particularly co-located care, can often be in settings where there is more wealth, where there are perhaps parents and families who have access to more resources. And I'm really, really keen for us to look at how intergenerational care can support families living in disadvantage. And I think many of our communities with different ethnicities are often living in those very communities. But my main point would be, Shahana sort of almost said this herself, but it's about families, like and our families look different in different places, but what can we do to reflect our families and the way that we like to live our lives in our care settings, both for children and for older people?
Definitely. I brought Alison Clyde in. Alison, I think you can unmute yourself and perhaps chip in here, because you've been posting some fantastic stuff in the chat. Hi, Alison.
Hi, Sheila. Thanks very much. Yeah, thanks. We would really welcome Jacqueline's recommendations for raising further awareness, because I think all these points that you've been saying have been really, really relative. When I was thinking and jotting down a few thoughts about what you were talking about, I think the training and preparing the workforce is really critical to make sure that you get good quality intergenerational work. And that is something that we've been busy doing with Apples and Honey, which is a co-located site down in London that you'll probably be very aware of. We're looking at a variety of different pathways to be able to get people to be trained, to understand, and possibly eventually. We've also had, there's been lots of recent research come out of Australia's Griffith University around the importance of training. I think another point that you talked about how do we get young people to understand what intergenerational work is, that is one of the challenges of intergenerational work, is that it's sometimes run by somebody who's really keen on it. So it's one person, and as soon as that person goes, you lose those projects. So there is a real importance to be able to do that. But by having different age groups and not just early years, we can actually be working within, which we're already doing, within secondary schools. And if you're getting 14, 15, right up to 18-year-olds involved in intergenerational work, it also gives them an insight into how care homes work, you know, what older people are like. And we've actually seen, as a direct result of projects, that young people actually choose to go into study social care. They go into having volunteering, part-time posts in care homes. So we can actually see that evidence. One of the things that we would like to see is that at the moment, intergenerational work is a nice thing to do, and it's not. So when we talk about policy, we need to talk about that it's an essential part of our work. It's all very well having conversations and saying, yeah, this is lovely, yeah, we think we should be doing stuff, but we need to have more interaction and more. It's already in a lot of policy, but when it's in policy, there's also that part of taking that policy and putting it into practice. We have about 17 that we have on a list, about 17 shared sites that are in the process of just opening up, or they've been delayed because of COVID, or they're in the planning permission, or they're in the building. So there is a massive interest for that. And just two more wee points. One other point is volunteering. we had a very interesting conversation with the Care Inspectorate, and one of the things that we would like to push, and we've been involved in Volunteer 19 with the new action plan with the Scottish Government, is volunteering in the care facilities. It isn't looked at as the same way as if you went into a hospice, there would be hundreds of volunteers involved. Our care homes across Scotland, we have got some that have got exceptionally good work, but there is a lot of care homes that don't have volunteering, and volunteering could be a brilliant way, not taken away from paid staff roles, but to give the extra capacity to be able to sustain and then maintain short life projects so that they become longer term. So I think it's probably enough from me.
No, that's brilliant, Alison. I mean, I want to encourage people to ask any questions they haven't asked so far, because we're fast running out of time and I'm about to ask the panelists to sum up. And I think that was a really interesting point, because there's something about the texture and the quality of people's experience once they need care, whether that's at home or whether that's in a care home, that is really enhanced by having many people engaged. And we're talking here about that cross-generational and intergenerational thing, but it is actually that opening up so that people's lives become bigger, not smaller. Just because people have care needs doesn't mean their lives should shrink into something that is just incredibly controlled. So thank you for mentioning volunteering, because it sounds like a really important area. I haven't got any more questions. Oh yeah, no, I have got one more. Right. Oh, that's a question from Alison. You're there, Alison. It's a comment, I think, more than a question. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. I want to ask in turn people who are here and involved. So to start with Jane, just your final comments to sum up a little bit, Jane.
Absolutely, yes. I think there's just so much rich discussion here today. I really wouldn't want us to lose this and say, oh, that was a good discussion, and then not a lot happens from it. So I know that some people have put contact details in the chat. Let's keep the discussion going. And I think when I read your report, Jacqueline, the phrase "it takes a village to raise a child" really resonated with me. And I thought that if you think about everything we've discussed today and the importance of this, we have a duty to figure out how to make this work, because we can make it work, and I'm sure we can knock down any barriers, because we're all committed and we know how beneficial this could be for children and quite transformational practice. So delighted to keep the discussions going.
Excellent. Karen.
Thank you. Yes, me too. Also want to keep these conversations going. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here. I wanted, just before we move on, to address the issue of volunteering in care homes. It's more complicated than you think, and actually can be so resource intensive that you wipe out your paid staff to make sure that you have enough volunteers. So it's not as easy as it might initially seem. That's not to say we should discount it completely, but it's more challenging than you might think. My key focus here would be around about the life course approach. And if we're taking that, then it will start to blur the boundaries that have manifested as a result of the systems within which we work. So we need to shake up these systems and start working on behalf of people instead of on behalf of those systems. And the approach that we are taking to the National Care Service is really not to wait until it's here, but to start trialing stuff and getting off the ground and use those as good examples that should therefore then exist when we see that National Care Service in existence. If anybody wants to trial something, then get in touch with me. I think there's only one other Karen Hedge in the world, and she bakes cakes, so you should find me quite easily. Really, we need to be using the tools of self-directed support to do that, to free up the systems and start to find more informal, intergenerational ways of working together. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Karen. Before I come to Jacqueline, I just want to say, there's obviously been a really rich kind of tapestry of things have come out of this for further discussion. If you've enjoyed this, and I'm speaking now to the participants, and you're not already subscribed to our David Hume Institute mailing list, please do get in touch and subscribe, because we do run a lot of discussions and we wouldn't want you to miss out. And just remember that we are a charity and we can't continue to bring you these types of sessions for free without donations. So do get in touch if you'd like to support us in any way. Jacqueline, the final word must rest with you, because you brought this work to the table.
Well, thank you, and I've really appreciated it, and I'm just very grateful that you've all had a good read of it. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you. This has been really good, and I think, as both Karen and Jane have said, let this not be the end of it. Let's kind of try and do something about it. And I think that's what I wanted from my report. There's amazing work happening. Alison and Generations working together are doing incredible stuff. And have a real sense of kind of what's happening across Scotland. Karen, we've heard from you about kind of what's happening formally and informally. Jane, your colleagues in early years, we know that there's hugely exciting work happening across the piece. We need to join this up. We need to understand what this all looks like and how do we learn from each other's best practice to make something happen at scale to really transform where we're at. Just a plea again, it's not just early years, although Jane, that's fantastic work that's happening in early years. It's not just early years. It's not just communities with resources, it's communities where we don't have resources. And actually, I think that's where it could make the most impact. It's about outcomes for children, not just outcomes for adults. And the outcome can't just be, do you understand older people better? It must be about health and well-being outcomes for older people and for children. And it's really about creating a policy and regulatory and risk environment that allows us to do something that we know is the right thing to do.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. And with that, it's really time for us to come to a close. Thanks so much to our speakers and also to Alison for chipping in there rather unexpectedly. We dragged her in, but it's such it was great to see all your comments in the chat, Alison, really useful information. So thank you very much, Jacqueline. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Karen. And thanks to everybody for taking part and asking your questions. The recording will be available on the DHI website, so to watch again or to share with people if you think this was something that you want to spread the word about. And we hope you'll join us again sometime. So thank you and goodbye to everybody. And panelists, you can stay with us for a bit of a chat afterwards.